By the summer of 1976, Meryl Streep, thanks in part to her starring role in Shakespeare in the Park's Measure for Measure, had taken New York theater by storm. That fall, she made the jump to the big screen when she was cast in a small part in the Vanessa Redgrave, Jane Fonda blockbuster, Julia.
Jane Fonda, Vanessa Redgrave, and Meryl Streep in a bit part where she basically appears in one scene and says very little. And yet, you watch her. You've always had that thing about Meryl that you watch her.
One of the people who noticed Meryl was New York's most famous director at that moment, Woody Allen, who had just completed his Oscar-winning film, Annie Hall. He immediately cast Meryl as his icy ex-wife in his next film, a love letter to New York called Manhattan. It was her first major film role, and Meryl was electrifying.
She just really came off the screen. I mean, she was a sort of repellent character in that movie, and a caricature, and she was in the movie very briefly, but boy.
She manages to be very tart and very sly and very critical of him. She really allows us to see that she had her reasons for leaving him.
She's playing an ice queen. Why was she playing an ice queen? Well, because she could. She could bloody well look like an ice queen. She has that look about her. She has that sort of high German face, you know, those cheekbones, the long, sharp nose. She can summon up arrogance very, very easily.
It was such a wonderful combination to have the warmth of Woody Allen and the coldness of Meryl Streep, the neurosis of Woody Allen and the neurosis of Meryl Streep, and it really, really made Manhattan a masterpiece.
In late 1977, Meryl and her fiancé John Cazale were both cast in The Deer Hunter, Michael Cimino's disturbing look at the aftermath of the Vietnam War. But shortly before filming was set to start, John got some terrible news. He was diagnosed with bone cancer. His prognosis was terminal.
Michael Cimino, the director, still wanted him for the film, tried to hide the fact that he was sick, but the financiers found out, tried to get him to recast the role. He refused, threatened to quit the project. Meryl Streep also threatened to quit the project.
We signed letters off. If this film stopped because of John, because of his death, we would not claim any more pay or anything like that.
They worked around the fact that he was a very ill man while he was making that film. They shot all of his scenes first because they knew that he was falling away, really, and they needed to get it done.
In light of John's illness, the small cast of The Deer Hunter became their own band of brothers, as they tried to deal with, and laugh about, not only the specter of death in Vietnam, but its very real presence right there in their midst.
He'd crack people up, she would crack people up. She was able to give him the strength, I felt, and courage to continue working.
Meryl and John's parts were completed in 6 weeks, and they moved back to their New York apartment, where Meryl put her career on hold and did everything she could to keep up John's spirits.
John was very sick, and Meryl was really there for him. Al Pacino told me that he'd never seen such love as what Meryl showed for John.
She was in the hospital with him the whole time. She was right there by his side.
John never got to see his performance in The Deer Hunter. He died on March 12, 1978, less than a year after being diagnosed. He was 42 years old.
Meryl said she was shocked that John died. I think she was too close to it. She was with him every day. She didn't really see the deterioration, and she didn't expect it.
Meryl got another shock a few days later when she was evicted from the apartment she shared with John because her name wasn't on the lease. Grieving and homeless, she accepted an offer by one of her brother's friends to sublet his loft while he was out of the country.
It actually ended up being a really beautiful love story out of this terrible tragedy. She was kicked out of the apartment that she'd been renting with John Cazale, and her brother suggested that she move into the apartment of a friend of his named Don Gummer.
Don Gummer was a sculptor who was spending the summer studying art in Europe. He ended up coming home earlier than planned, and he and Meryl found their destiny. On September 15, 1978, a few months after they met, Meryl and Don Gummer were married in her parents' backyard on Mason's Island in Connecticut. More than 30 years later, they're still together.
She once said that she was born to be married, she was born to have a family. That's something she always knew that she'd have.
Mainly, I want to thank Don, my husband, 30 years, for .
I asked her about Don. What was it like to be married to a civilian? She said, well, you know, he's not an actor, but he's not a civilian. He's an artist. He's a creative person, and he understands what making something from nothing is all about.
The Deer Hunter was a hit when it was released in December 1978, and Meryl ended up nominated for an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress. When she turned up next, starring in the drama Kramer vs. Kramer opposite Dustin Hoffman, most people thought the role had been written for Meryl. But the truth was, the role of Joanna Kramer was a part she was never supposed to have had.
Meryl Streep was actually supposed to have a very small part in Kramer vs. Kramer. She was supposed to be Dustin Hoffman's one-night stand. Kate Jackson was going to be Joanna Kramer. And then she couldn't get out of her Charlie's Angels contract. Can you imagine?
Meryl Streep wasn't the first choice for the part, but she came in and she blew Dustin Hoffman away.
Even before filming started, Meryl thought Kramer vs. Kramer's story, or at least her end of it, wasn't realistic.
I wanted to portray someone whose mental instability and emotional frailty was so precarious that she would do this thing, that she would leave a kid. And I had to understand it myself in order to play it.
She insisted that we know something about this woman, her fragility, her reasons for leaving.
Meryl shared her concerns with Kramer vs. Kramer's writer-director Robert Benton, who appreciated her input. But co-star Dustin Hoffman let everyone know he was unhappy about Meryl's contributions.
In any movie where Dustin Hoffman plays a principal role, there's going to be arguing, you know, there's going to be some contentiousness.
If Dustin Hoffman thought he was going to steal scenes from Meryl Streep, I think he learned pretty quickly that he couldn't, that this was an actress who really held her ground and who really held focus when she was on camera.
Meryl is absent from most of Kramer vs. Kramer, which focuses on Dustin Hoffman learning to raise his son. By the time Meryl reappears, the film is stacked against her.
When she comes back, our attitude as an audience is to say, screw this lady, you know, what did she just do? She's just left her kid to go find herself. How selfish could you be? And instead, Meryl doesn't let you think that.
She came in and changed the dynamic slightly and made it more of a question mark in the audience's mind. Well, maybe he is better off with his mother.
Kramer vs. Kramer won all the top Oscars for 1979, including Best Picture. Meryl won the Best Supporting Actress award, and Dustin Hoffman won for Best Actor. But that didn't mean that all was forgiven.
They really haven't done anything else together. I think that speaks for itself.
It was Meryl's last Best Supporting Actress nomination for over 20 years. In between were 10 nominations for Best Actress and an Oscar win for what is considered one of the best performances of all time.
Meryl was so good. It wasn't like a movie. I always feel that really happened.